as you all know, this is called the Social Innovation Forum, and we have a very strong belief that we need to get a lot better at driving innovation in the nonprofit and the government sector to deal with social issues today, and we actually are not very good at that from our perspective at Root Cause. So I thought we'd have a brief conversation with the two of them to talk a little bit about that. But interestingly enough, before we start there, I did have the opportunity to spend some time with both of them and learn that they both have some pretty interesting backgrounds, that while what they're most noted for is their success now in the private sector, that they have some pretty deep roots on social issues and the contributions they're either making now or where they came from. So I thought we'd start there just to hear a little bit about their background. So do you want to start?
I will start gladly. I became politically and civically engaged early on, I think, or conscious at least early on in my life, when at age 10 my whole world was changed by a political event, the Cuban Revolution. And so I still go to bed every night praying that I will outlive the Castro brothers. It's a toss-up whether I will or not. But anyway, so I became very conscious that being engaged was important and active, although I clearly was a child, arrived in this country and really see myself shaped by the late 60s. So in 1970, I volunteered in the mayoral campaign of John Lindsay in New York, and at that point it was his second term. The city was just a real boiling pot of social issues, and there was, I've got to say, just that bracket to bracket that part of my life. The Lindsay administration, although it's long forgotten, was a real source of enormous urban innovation. And I just was, although I was very young and watching, I ended up from working in the Parks Department when we were opening up the parks to anti-Vietnam demonstrations and all sorts of things that those green pastures had never seen before, to really an attempt to decentralize city government, working in the Office of Neighborhood Government. So at that point, I thought I watched while a generation of real urban innovators did their thing. And then I came here to go to the Kennedy School and ended up in another incredibly innovative administration of Kevin White here for 8 years, where I was chief of policy and deputy mayor. And actually there are some ex-White people here, so there, Celine Solomon. We're everywhere. It's quite a network. So I learned about innovation really in government. I'm still a huge believer, although you know that it's enormously important. Although innovation, I now believe, is much better enabled in the nonprofit and certainly the private sectors, because government is so resource strapped and dealing with such complexity. I still have come out of that whole part of my life believing that government needs to be a player, and that for it to succeed in some way, you need to engage at least to ultimately give social innovation true scale. There's a part that still engages the government. So we'll talk more about that later, but that's hopefully I've learned lessons about innovation that I've brought to the private sector.
It's quite a story. She knows a lot about Cuban restaurants also, if you ever need some help on that. I just found out that there's one in London I need to know about.
It's those you don't expect.
So the question was about background. I, like Micho, I hadn't heard her story quite that way before, but it was also not a single life event that I was involved in, but a series of events that happened around me when I was probably in junior high and high school that really formed a real passion for cities and sort of what happens when cities sort of blow up and disappear. I grew up in the city of Pittsburgh around the time that the steel industry was going through its very, very difficult transition and moving primarily offshore, and was the son of a U.S. attorney at the time who had also run for public office once and not made it, but had spent a lot of time in public life and got to know, in those days, the mayor of Pittsburgh, who was a guy named Richard Caligiuri, who was a friend of my father's, and he had crafted this, what he called Renaissance 2, which was a plan to really revitalize Pittsburgh in the midst of this, terrible downturn in the economy when when I think it was 18 or 19% of the population had lost their job in 10 years. And so to really watch how someone that was that passionate about cities and what happens to cities when they lose their major industry, if they're a single industry city, and then observe what's happened over the last 30 or 40 years and see how Pittsburgh has really reinvented itself around education, around technology, around healthcare, and around financial services, and really become a much more diversified economy, and revitalize the downtown area and done smart things with government, including some things governments often screw up with football and baseball stadiums, and really reinventing the entire community around passion for sports and hard work, which is the basic culture of the city. And so for me, that was really a life-changing event to be able to go off. My father, I think, smartly advised me to take my passion for observing some of those things and do it in the private sector as opposed to try to do it in the public sector. But I've been a huge observer and fan of that, and to come into Zipcar with that background, with an idea that cities can really change and partner with the private sector in companies like Zipcar and do something very profound and change the way people behave and change the lifestyle and the economics of a city, has been fascinating. And so that's one of the reasons I was so excited about Zipcar when I first saw the company. So that's the background.